So let's get started. Hello, everybody. My name's Katie and I'm from Frankston City Libraries. Before we get started, I'd like to acknowledge the Bunurong people of the Kulin Nation on whose land Frankston City Library operates, and extend my respect to their elders past, present and emerging. Considering we are on Zoom and we may be joined by people interstate and from other parts of Victoria, I'd like to extend that respect to elders from any other communities who may be joining us today. I'd like to introduce Rachael Johns, who will be chatting with us today about her brand new book, and she'll be in conversation today with Claire Halliday. So ladies, passing over to you, you can take it away.
Thank you, Katie, and thank you to Frankston City Library for making this possible. I know we're slowly coming out of all these restrictions, but it's great that talks like this can give us access to people coming in from different parts of Victoria, different parts of Australia. And of course, our author that we're featuring today is one of those people, Rachael Johns. Welcome, and we're here to talk about your new book, Outback Secrets.
Thank you. Thank you so much to you for doing the interview, and to Katie and everyone at Frankston Library, and yes, for everyone to come turning up. Thank you.
Now, this new book is part of the Bunyip Bay series, which I know you originally intended as just a 3-book series, but here we are, and it's book number 5. But this book focuses on a character who has appeared before. His name's Liam Castle. We're going to be careful not to give away too many spoilers, but we're just going to, dig into it a little bit. He's the publican at the country pub. Now, I have a bit of a fascination with country town halls and country pubs, but what's your fascination with country pubs, and what makes the publican a potentially, rich vein as a character to draw on?
Well, firstly, my interest, I suppose, is I've lived a quarter of my life in small rural communities, not at the moment, unfortunately. And so then while we lived in Coden up in the southwest, great southern of WA, and Goomalling in the wheat belt. And then my husband's family comes from Southern Cross, so almost out at Kalgoorlie. For anyone in WA, I'm sorry, you might know what I'm talking about. If not, those are some names Kalgoorlie you've probably heard of, and Southern Cross. And so we did a lot of driving over those years between country towns, and I've been up north and done more driving, and I just love I love everything about rural communities in terms of the camaraderie between locals who know each other very, very well. But I've noticed a lot that often the country pub, which was probably once the hub of the local community, a lot of towns these days, they're either not operational anymore, or they're very run down and derelict. And some are really still thriving, and that's great. And some, depends on who's at the helm, I suppose, as the publican, and who owns the lease. But yeah, I've just sort of got a fascination with this place that can bring so many local people together. But also, and the buildings. I think for me, not that wasn't a huge part of this book. I read another book, Mandrout, which also was set in a country pub, and that was sort of about the reinvention of the pub and the revival of it and bringing it back to life and things like that. Stuff that I kind of have a dream of. I would love to do that myself with an old, building in the country, but I know that I don't have the skills. In terms of I love pubs and country pubs especially. In terms of the character, whenever I go to hairdressers, they're always like, you should write a book about us. You should write a book about us. We hear all the gossip, especially the country towns. But, it's an old adage that publicans or bartenders and hairdressers get told all the deepest, darkest secrets of everybody, and they know, and so that was kind of, Liam came first because I knew, as you said, I'm not very good at maths, so I thought I was writing a 3-book series. It turned out to be 5 so far. Who knows whether there'll be any more. And Liam was never someone I really gave a huge amount of thought to in any of the others, but because I do have a love of pubs, and it's somewhere where the people can meet in the community, he appeared in all of them. I thought very little about him. I think I only said he had a dog and he was reasonably good looking. That was literally pretty much all I said in any of the other books. So when more people wanted books in Bunyip Bay and my publisher wanted another, Liam just seemed the obvious character because he was the only one kind of left that hadn't, out of the main characters that I'd introduced, that hadn't had a story kind of thing. And then, so from there, I just thought about, well, he's a publican. I can't change that. That's already what I've got. And that whole, a line came into my head was that Liam the publican knows the secrets of everyone in Bunyip Bay, but no one knows his secrets. and that just did come from that whole thing about, you know, publicans, hairdressers, people in those sort of roles. They often know a lot more about people than, you know, they let on. And so yeah, it really just came from that. And then I had to work out what his secret was, because I had no idea, and what secrets were in the town. And this is where I kind of wished that I'd been a better planner from the start, and I'd seeded a few things throughout, but I can't go back and rewrite.
Now, obviously, we don't want to give away any spoilers because we want people to read and enjoy the book. But I'm sure there are probably a few people in the talk who haven't yet read the book. So paint us a little bit more of a detailed picture of Liam Castle. He had a dog. He's reasonably good looking. He's got a secret.
Yeah,
What else? Who else is he? Like, what are his strengths? What are his flaws? How would you describe him?
I think his strengths are that he is a genuinely kind of kind-hearted person who wants the best, and he's very loyal. You know, he's a family man without any family. So I guess the community of Bunyip Bay has become his family, and he takes that very seriously and looks out for his patrons. And, you know, so he is, I guess, what I called, initially when I started writing him, he was a little, possibly a bit of a, not so much a real grumpy hero, but kind of a hero, a little bit with a tortured past and edge to him. That sort of, he keeps himself, he's part of the community, but he also keeps himself apart from the community. And I suppose that's why it's a perfect sort of character for a hero in a romance novel, because, you know, he's been in town 10 years and he's given away relatively little about his life. He's managed to, you know, stay under the radar a little bit. First, when he arrived, I said people were wondering who he was and stuff. But, you know, as happens in lots of towns and communities, you know, things happen and they're the centre of focus for a while, and then something else happens. So he kind of, you know, has now just become part of the furniture almost. And so, of course, what he needs is somebody who doesn't just let him be part of the furniture and starts digging deeper into who he really is. I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, I was wondering, are you a Gilmore Girls fan? Have you been a fan? Because he reminded me in that way, in some ways, of the character of Luke, who runs the cafe and, you know, is part of the town's fabric, but, you know, has his little edge and has his sort of distance from everybody in the community.
I'd love to say I was a Gilmore Girls fan, because so many people say how great Gilmore Girls is. I've watched earlier this year, I think, the first 2 episodes of Gilmore Girls, and that was the first time I ever watched them. I was watching, why did I write? I was watching because for the current book I was writing, it's about mother-daughter, kind of a teenage daughter. So I was watching a bit because of the dynamics for that. And I don't know why I never stopped. I think life just got busy. I mean, I stopped. But I didn't really watch any TV for probably 10, 15 years while I was attempting to write. I was attempting to get published, and I had really young children as well. So it was like, that was one of the things that had to go. So I've got a lot of catching up to do.
Well, we're not here to talk about TV. We are here to talk about your book. But there was just that little bit that sort of reminded me of that character.
I know who you mean from those 2 episodes I watched, and I'm happy with that comparison.
And so I guess the ups and downs of friendships and, you know, issues about trust and people having secrets and who's keeping secrets and who's protecting secrets and who's about to uncover secrets, they're all, you know, foundations of intriguing fiction. So give us a snapshot, without the spoilers, of what Outback Secrets is about in terms of those 3 core things that swirl around within the storyline.
Oh, hang on, what, Chris? You said secrets?
Friendships, trust, and secrets. I mean, they're at the heart of most stories.
Yeah, I think relationships, even in not straight romance novels, but relationships are at the heart of many stories, and secrets at many genres. I think if you can get a secret in there, I even heard if you can put secrets in the blurb, you know, you're more likely to, because people do love a good secret. And so tell you a bit more about those three things. Well, trust, I guess, to me, trust is something that's often at the heart of many romance novels, but also women's fiction novels, because often the characters, you know, they're likable people often, but they're flawed people, or they've got things in their past that are giving them, you know, pause to make connections. And often they're not people who find trust really easy because of things that have happened in their past. And so I think that's a core theme in lots of things. And to me, it was a core theme. I didn't really even think about that being, but I guess they both need to learn to trust each other, and it happens pretty fast. Because for anyone, just a brief, quickly thing, Outback Secrets is a fake relationship story. Is kind of the overarching plot, I suppose. There's a lot, and so it doesn't take place over a long period of time. It's only about a month, I think, and so that is a short period of time for two people who are quite independent, both Liam, the publican, who has sort of reasons in his past that he's holding back from connecting with new people, and Henri, who has Henrietta is the heroine, and she has a big family and many friends, but she sort of has a career that keeps her apart. She's an agricultural pilot, hence where I'm wearing little airplane earrings. And so, she kind of, because of her position, she has that boundary, walls up, I suppose, as well. And so they both need to learn to trust each other, but also I think they need to learn to trust, Liam needs to learn to sort of trust the wider community, although he doesn't this is, try not to give a spoiler, he doesn't necessarily reveal everything to the wider community. He only reveals himself completely to Henrietta, at least in the course of the book. But maybe I have sort of thoughts that maybe further on, because of his sort of friendship with Henri and his love with Henri and her family, that maybe he will start to open himself up to more people. So he trusts Henri and reveals himself to her, and also another character in the book called Sexy Rexy, who is kind of a bit of a I hesitant to say he's a drunk, but he's that person who's always at the pub and doesn't really have anywhere else to go. He runs the town tip, and so in some ways Liam has a bit of a relationship with him and trusts him with his secret in the end, though he doesn't necessarily it doesn't happen because he decides to, whereas Henri needs to learn, I suppose, to trust herself, in terms of trust that her way and what she wants for her life, she kind of feels like that other people don't think she's doing the right sort of thing and that she should choose a different path. And she learns to trust that her path is the right way, kind of thing. And also in some ways, I'm really trying hard not to give spoilers. She has an incident in the air right at the beginning of the book when she's flying, and to Henrietta, flying is everything. That's her life. And if she can't fly, who is she? And so I guess she needs to learn to trust her instincts and to trust who she is at her heart, to be able to continue to be who she wants to be, but also to learn other things. I don't know if I've answered that question very well. Sorry.
That's okay. Now, the career that you've chosen for her, your character, Henrietta Forward, as you said, agricultural pilot, and that's got a lot to do with how the sort of plot unfolds about the beginnings of the relationship between Liam and Henrietta, because she has got this dangerous job, and her mother, you mentioned before, the interest of those complex mother-daughter relationships. Her mum's not a huge fan of this dangerous career, and her mum has this plan to convince her daughter to settle down in Bunyip Bay. And so, without too many spoilers, what part does Liam play in that story? Because the way things start between them, it's not really based on reality.
No, it's not at all. And I actually decided I wrote two versions of this book, 30,000 words of one, with a different character, Henrietta. So I had Liam all the time, but I had a different heroine. And then I realised that wasn't working, and I wrote 5,000 words of another heroine, completely different, still Liam, before I realised that wasn't working in my gut. So I threw away 65,000 words, which was very painful. It's half a book if you add it all up, and or even more than half. And then I felt that I needed a character because Liam, this is a rural romance. Liam is the publican, so he's not, working out on a farm or doing a typically agricultural type job. I felt like I needed to have a heroine who did have a bit more rural roots and possibly a job that was in sort of at the agricultural kind of realm. And so I road tested quite a few and then came up with the agricultural pilot idea. But then I still didn't really match with my original idea that I had for the story, which wasn't a fake relationship. So I was in a huge pickle. And then I asked a really good reviewer friend of mine who reads a lot of contemporary romance, what's your favorite sort of romance trope? And she said fake relationships. And I must admit, it's not one of my favorites often, because as you said, it's not grounded in reality. I mean, how many people in real life actually have, go up to someone and say, hey, will you pretend to be my fiance, or will you pretend to marry me so we can, I think it's one of those things that worked well in historical fiction, because, there was more reasons why, a woman would maybe want, but also why a man, you used to be, if you're a family man, you can get it, and you seem to have a good wife, then maybe you'll be able to get a career, or things like that. And now I think those reasons are kind of gone. So when she said that, I was like, okay, this is a challenge. I'm going to do it. But I struggled, in myself with that whole reality thing. So it had to feel quite organic to me. And so I didn't sort of have Henrietta. Henri's the one that proposes this idea to Liam. But I didn't have her. I wanted her to be a feisty character who's in some ways a little, she talks before she thinks, rather than be sure she talks like we're told we should do. And so what happens is, after she accidentally falls asleep at the pub after having a few drinks one night and is seen leaving the pub in the very early hours of the morning, the local busybody, oh my gosh, I've forgotten her name now. I think maybe, anyway, it's been a while.
It's early. You maybe haven't had enough coffee, and you've written a lot of books, so we forgive you.
Yeah. I think that, no, I don't want to say what her name is, because I think maybe Eileen. It's Eileen Brady, I think. Anyway, she meets Henrietta in the local shop, which is another place where I think is the hub of the community, often in local towns. There's the sort of the supermarket area. And she, says she's heard that, she has been seen leaving the pub, and, being a busybody, and also Liam being a little bit sort of mysterious, and he has got a suspicious wound on his shoulder that a few people have seen. They don't know where he came from. He doesn't have very family to visit and stuff. So she basically warns Henrietta off, and Henri takes offence to this because Liam has looked after her the night before, and she just bursts out, well, you're too late to warn me off because we've already basically got a thing together. I did peel it back a little bit in the edits, because in my first version, she tells them they're in love. And I thought, this is a bit too, so she just basically says, we're sort of seeing each other a lot. Because
she's looking for a way to get her mother off her back. She's looking for a way for her mother to stop hassling her about.
She said she's not looking, but she doesn't realise that this is a reason until after she's blurted it out, sort of to defend Liam's, I can't think of, to defend Liam. And then she suddenly clicks and she thinks, well, hang on, maybe this is a good idea, because maybe if Eileen tells everybody everything, so maybe if Eileen thinks I'm with Liam, then maybe my mum and my family will get off my back. Of course, then she has to go and confront Liam and tell him that she has come up with this plan, and he actually goes along with it, which hopefully I wrote in a realistic way. But I think he's kind of, at first, he's attracted to her, and he thinks she's only in town for a little bit of time, so hey, why not help her out?
Well, the agricultural pilot really works because, it does set up, she's obviously a woman who's a strong woman, she's an independent woman, she's a bit fearless. So it creates that character perfectly. But I guess when you choose a work role like that, you have to be sort of authentic and accurate in the way you're talking about what she does. So what was your research process for sort of finding out how agricultural pilots work, and, even the vernacular and things like that, getting it right?
Yeah, I knew that I needed to find people who could help me, because, you can read, and I did this, I looked up things online, I Googled agricultural flying and how you become an agricultural pilot, what exactly different types of flying you might do as an agricultural pilot, and I Googled the planes that are used. But yeah, it's one of those things that you kind of I would need to do a whole degree and actually fly a plane to really understand how it works. So I put out on Facebook, which I often do, a call out to my readers to say, does anyone know any agricultural pilots who would be willing to talk to me? Because I'm terrible. I love Facebook for that, because I'm terrible at ringing up places and asking. I always thought that after when I was trying to get published for years and years, I was always too scared to call people up for, research information. And I always thought, once I've written a book, then I'll be able to, ring up and say, I'm a published author. But now I've written like over 20 books and I still feel embarrassed and scared to say that. So Facebook's been great. And I did get a number of responses. I talked a little bit to a couple, but it was really one guy who just went above and beyond. I sent him, a few questions about, it was more sort of like what types of contracts would you be getting, what time of year. I'm very annoying when I'm talking to anyone who's an expert in terms of research, because I'm trying to fit my plot around what is actually could possibly possible. So I'm saying to him, okay, she lives in the north. She lives in Bunyip Bay, which is actually based on a town called Dongara near Gelton. I want her to, be home and for Christmas, but he was having to tell me what sort of contract she could be doing just before. But then he was very kind and generous, and he offered to read the book for me, and that was amazing. So he read. As I was going, he read a few key scenes, but a lot of the flying stuff actually happened in the edits. I wrote this book, as I said, very fast because I wrote 65,000 words first, and it needed quite a big revision. And I think because I do need time to process things as I'm writing, and I didn't have that. And beforehand, I often, think a lot about the characters and the plot beforehand, even though I don't actually plot things out. I kind of have a vague idea in my head, and I didn't have that time sort of to percolate the story. So it wasn't how it needed to be when I first submitted it. And it needed quite a lot more revisions than usual. And one of the things that I hadn't put enough in really was we didn't see Henri flying at all in the first version. She didn't have any issues with flying in the first version. It was purely that she was coming home for Christmas and she was kind of annoyed that her family were. So she does have an issue with flying, as I mentioned, because now this is not a spoiler because the big prologue of the book starts with her flying up north Kimberley's and having a near miss sort of where she has to crash land the plane, and she walks away fine, but then discovers that she's actually, not emotionally fine. So all that sort of stuff, I asked him, I said, if you were flying a plane and suddenly what could go wrong, and he gave me a number of different scenarios. And then I was really lucky that he's a bit of a writer himself. He writes poetry and stuff, but also has a lot of alone time being, out on planes, but also, not with his family while he's sleeping, at nights and stuff and having his breaks. And so he actually wrote me a crash scene kind of thing, sort of stream of consciousness, just to, this is what I would do. And so that was very useful. So for this, I did Google research, and I spoke to a couple of pilots, but he was the most useful. My friend, Anthea Hodgson, who runs an online book club with me as well, her husband is a Qantas commercial pilot. So it's slightly different to Henri, but there was certain things that I asked him about too that happened in the middle of the book. So yeah, it's a team effort, I suppose.
I'm imagining you might have to almost, have some formal process where people apply to be your expert. Because you'd be in danger of having some fantasist dog groomer who's imagined he's an agricultural pilot just making stuff up.
Oh my gosh, I never thought about that. Luckily, the person, that would be worrying. I'm like, here, I've got this expert and it's just some random person. Luckily that I had the other people that put me in contact with this guy. He wasn't on my page and stuff, and I'm pretty sure he was kosher. But yeah, that's scary. The other thing is,
sorry, I shouldn't have messed with your head. I'll go on to the next question.
I was just going to say the other thing though. I'll just say that I did have about 3 or 4 people contact me, and I had like one message with a couple. But then so you've got to, sometimes you need to find your right person for research, and we just clicked and it worked. Yeah.
Now, I've heard you say that you never reread your own books, which I found kind of interesting, especially because you are, creating these stories in a particular community where characters do sort of appear throughout. How do you sort of remember who's who, and if you are continuing a thread of a little storyline that mentions a character, how do you remember, what they were doing in the last one and what they should do, what would fit with their character to do in the next book?
That's a good question. I'd love to say I keep meticulous notes in a spreadsheet that has all the names of people I've written and their details, because that would be clever and that would be useful in hindsight. But I did actually, I have to confess, for this book, I did reread all the Bunyip Bay series last year, which was an interesting experience because until then I've never read a whole book of mine in its entirety after, it's gone through all the editing process. And it was interesting because I must admit I didn't love Outback Dreams at all when I wrote it, and I was quite worried. It's my third book and I felt like, oh golly, this is going to be the end. But many people loved it, and some people say it's their favourite book. So when I went back to read that, I wasn't expecting to enjoy it as much as I did. So I think, you're never the best judge of your own work. And it's amazing, for any aspiring writers, a lot of advice often is to leave your work once you've done a first draft for as long as you can, at least a couple of weeks. Sadly, once you become a contracted, author and you're writing 1 or 2 books a year, in my case sometimes, often I don't have that luxury. But it's amazing what, you can sort of see in hindsight. So that's a writing thing. But yeah, even like leaving my books a few years, I think I can almost read them forgetting that they're mine. Whereas, so I did read it all, and I wrote notes as I was going along to make sure, who do we want to have glimpses of, who was pregnant in one book that maybe I need to have a baby, because a lot of readers were like, I want to know who had, what these people had and things like that. So I wanted to make sure that I gave the readers that had been in the series before sort of those little treats, but I also wanted to make sure that it was a standalone as well. So you can read it as a standalone. But saying that, you said about consistency, I did have an interesting issue with that because I used Logan, who's a character from he's in Outback Sisters. He was one of the heroes. There was 2 heroes and 2 heroines in Outback Sisters, if anyone hasn't read it. And Logan, I loved in Outback Sisters. He's a really, really nice guy. I mean, all my heroes are kind of, hopefully good guys, even if they start a bit grumpy. But the problem is I needed to then use him not so much necessarily a good light. I wanted him to be trying to uncover Liam's and other people's secrets in town because he's a journalist. And so in the first version, and I felt this as I was writing it, thinking, well, why is, this doesn't seem right. I don't feel like he would go about doing this, even though, journalists get a bad rep sometimes, there's a whole different type. And I feel like he is not someone who would, put his career above the people that he knows in town, the community a lot. But I kept on with it because I'm like, I need him to do this. If I bring in another character, it's going to look weird. I need him to do it. And then again, that was one of the things that my editors sort of picked up and said, this doesn't put him in a very good light. And I won't mention names, but there's a really great Australian author who wrote a very popular book quite a few years ago, and I love her. I love the book. And then she wrote a sequel about 10 years later where the characters from that book were in the same book, but the hero from that book had changed, and he was a nasty, horrible character. And, a lot of readers got really, really angry about that, and I could understand. So I had to really work hard to keep the storyline, but not make Logan out to be a horrible person. So instead of him trying to get an article for himself, I kind of said that his boss was wanting him to do a story because he'd heard stuff going on, and brought him in a good feels podcast thing. So you have to kind of really think a lot of those things through when you've got characters that you've had before and you don't want to ruin them from a previous book.
Well, really with any characters, I guess you've got to think of that stuff. So I'm wondering how you do generally sort of walk that line and find that balance, because if you're creating authentic characters that you want people to relate to and find believable, they have to be flaws.
Definitely.
They can't be perfect. So how do you do that? How do you find that balance between a character that you want people to love and have empathy with and understand, but also show them just as a human?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think it depends on genre a lot as well, because, in certain genres, say psychological thriller or some even crime, you don't necessarily have to like the characters that you're reading about. You do sort of want to, they need to be well motivated. So you want to sort of understand why they're doing certain things. But sometimes there's a book I read that I really enjoyed recently, I'm trying to think of this, the main character or the main villain I was like, why are they doing this? Why? You know, and although I really enjoyed it, they were just a bad person. And that's not enough for me. And I think that's the same in all genres. Like, to me, I want my characters to be, yes, mostly likable, but that doesn't mean everything they do is likable. And, you know, we all have bad thoughts. You know, we might think we're a hard, deep person, but we get jealous, we get angry. And so I think it's a lot about making them a real character and making them relatable. And so also giving them, I mean, there's not an old book, but a book called Save the Cat. And there's also a new version of it called Save the Cat. Well, not a new version. Save the Cat is a craft book. I know some of the writers here might have heard of it, which talks about, it's a screenplay writing book. And then there's another one written by somebody else, but takes the same sort of theory and stuff, called Save the Cat Writes a Novel. And the title, Save the Cat, is actually about a beat that you want to have in your film or your book. And that is like, if you have a character who isn't that likable, maybe it's a really grumpy aggro hero and you don't yet know why, you know, you've got to show insight in them doing something like saving a cat, or, you know, helping an elderly woman, or, you know, just doing something to show that, you know, they may come across as not a good person. They may have flaws. We all have flaws. But, you know, deep down, you want to be barracking for them, I think, especially in this genre, especially when the hero, you know, in romance, a hero and heroine, you want to be able to fall in love with the hero, or depends if you're a man or woman or what your sexual pulsation is and all that. But, you know, I'm just making a generalization here. And you want to be able to really relate to the heroine and feel like they could be a good friend. So I think it is all about motivation. I think it's about giving them their own voice too, and so you really feel like they're a real person. So, you know, with Henri, that is maybe being a little bit sarcastic, a little bit flirty, or, you know, there was things I had to pull back on though because of the era we're living in. But yeah, sorry, I don't know if I've answered that question very well.
That's okay. It's interesting though that you talked about finding that voice, because Outback Secrets, you switch between 2 points of view, Henrietta's and Liam's, which is not an uncommon thing to do in this type of fiction, and something you've done in previous books. But what do you need to be mindful of as a writer when you are making that switch? Because I guess you have to make sure that you're actually capturing their voice and not making them sound just like the one homogenous person.
There's a few questions I feel like in there too, because so in rural romance or romance contemporary, or any romance, historical romance, often you do get the hero's point of view and the heroine. And then I also write general women's fiction, and often I have multiple female point of views. In some ways, it's easier to distinguish when you're writing a male and a character and a female character, because, you know, females are often a little bit more emotional in how we think and talk. Sometimes our sentences go on and on, or mine do. We over-explain. Men are much more to the point. They're, you know, often, this is generalization, of course, but they're often, you know, less emotional. They think different ways. So, you know, you just have to sort of get in each character's head. I had a male editor for the first probably 5 years of my writing career, which I think was really good, because he would pull me up on things. It was like, that guy wouldn't think like that. So, you know, maybe get a male to read, you know, the male sort of point of view, and make sure you're but I think it's also, so I feel like for male and female characters, or characters of totally different ages, you know, if you're writing a teenage character and you're writing an elderly gentleman, they're going to be, your voice is kind of, they're going to come across. So you really just need to get in their heads and think about, you know, it's a bit like method acting, you know, get in there, pretend you are that character. But some tricks when I'm writing multiple characters of similar age and often the same gender is, give them quirks, you know, whether they, I'm just trying to think of, like, you know, give them things that they do, whether they constantly, you know, they notice colour, or they are always drinking Diet Coke, or they swear a lot, or they don't swear at all. Things like religion, you know, their family and friends, their upbringing, or if you make them a well-rounded character and you're looking at all the different things that form character, then I feel like that comes naturally. But yeah, a lot is dialogue too. Like, so in my book, How to Mend a Broken Heart, which was this year's women's fiction novel, I do have 2 point of views, 2 female point of views. One is a 50-year-old woman and one was a 25-year-old woman. And at first, so again, you don't have to get it right the first time, because, you know, these are things that can often be developed. I find, for me, it depends how you write, but I'm quite an organic writer, and I won't get my character's voice necessarily, you know, perfect. Well, nothing's ever perfect, but, you know, some of that stuff happens in editing, like making sure. And as I said, again, I don't think we're never the best judge of our own character. So I might think my two main characters, two females, say 50 and 25, I feel like, well, they're different, because in my head, they're totally different people, but you don't necessarily get that across on the page. So I think getting other people to read your stuff, and my editors said to me, and this is whatever stage you are in your writing, because if you're a beginner writer, you know, you might not have an experienced editor who's going to look at your stuff, but you usually know either other writers or readers. And so my editor said to me with that book, they actually speak very similar. So, you know, I can't really distinguish between the 50-year-old woman and the 25-year-old woman. And it was really a small fix, because it was just a matter of changing some phrases and some word choices. Before everyone came in, Katie and Claire and I were talking about YA fiction a little bit, you know, and the voice in that is very different to if you're reading, say, a book by Liz Bursky or, you know, Judy Nunn. And so, but sometimes it's as simple as, changing a couple of words here or there.
Yeah, no, that's true. I do a lot of ghostwriting and interviewing people and telling their stories in their words. And it's just a matter of finding, you know, their adjective, their adverb that they use in everyday speech. So if somebody who knows them reads it, they'll go, oh, yeah, that's them talking, because that's their word.
Yeah, and so ghostwriting, that is sort of similar, I guess. I've never done ghostwriting, but in terms of, I'm writing a character, you know, fiction writers are writing a character, but they should be real people in our minds. They want to be real people. Yeah. So you're doing the same as a ghostwriter. You're getting inside their heads and you're writing, but they have to make it up.
We are talking about characters, and with 5 books, wasn't meant to be, but it is. There are so many memorable Bunyip Bay characters. Is it bad to ask who your favourite is? Is that too hard?
Oh, no, it's not too hard. I was thinking first, but then suddenly I realised it's not too hard. I mean, I love them all, actually. They're all.
You've got to say the ones in this book, don't you?
Yeah. Or if I was good at publicity, I would say, it's definitely Henri or Liam, because, you know, blah, blah, we're always supposed to say the latest, and I do love them. But there's a character that appears in this book that has appeared in everyone from Outback Ghost, and that is Heidi. She is a young she's a girl. I think she's 7 or 6 in the first book, and she's probably about 9 or 10 in this one. And she is Stella, who's the main character of Outback Ghost's daughter, and she's got Down syndrome, and she's the most beautiful little girl, and she helps a lot of people in that book. And she's actually kind of still looking out. I showed that she's looking out for Liam, and she can kind of tell, you know, she's very in touch with people's emotions and feelings. So she was special to me to write, because I did know a little girl with Down syndrome who was adorable and gorgeous, and I sort of based on her. But also, she's been much loved to a lot of people. So not a main point of view character. I haven't written in her point of view, but definitely her. And I thought I'll just answer Anna's first question. Just I know we're going to do the questions at the end, but that kind of just relates to it. So Anna said, can you read Outback Secrets as a standalone? And yes, you definitely can. I've had reviewers wrote it that way, because, you know, when you've written 5 books and there's 4 of them, it's been a few years between books, I wrote it for 2 reasons. One, because I really wanted to write Liam's story, even though it drove me. What did someone say to me? It was a near-death experience writing this book. But I got through it, so now I can be a bit fond about it. But I wanted to give new readers, because I've written a number of books in between the Bunyip Bay books, and so people have found me through other books, and they, you know, like me, don't necessarily have time to read the whole series before then. And then there's others who will hopefully find me through Outback Secrets. And so I really worked hard to give the people who'd read the books before enough of previous books, but not too much. And, you know, nothing that actually happens in the previous books matters in this book, if that makes sense. It's completely standalone. The characters that appeared in previous books, so sort of I used them in this book as the secondary characters that you need, but you don't need to have known their stories. And there's no spoilers, I don't think. So I think you could still, I worked really hard about that, because there is a mystery running through the first 3 books. And I tried not to spoil that mystery while referring to a couple of things that had happened in this book. So yeah, if you read it alone and you like it, you can go back and the others will hopefully not be spoiled, but you don't have to. Yeah, hopefully that answers that question.
Now, we are due to finish in about 15 minutes, so we're definitely going to have time for audience questions. So if you haven't put a question in the chat yet, now would be a great time to do it. I just had a couple more of my own questions to squeeze in before we come to that. You said something then about the Down syndrome character, Rachael, and how it was sort of based on somebody you knew loosely. And that's lovely to think that you have based this really sweet character that is your favourite on the positive attributes of somebody that you've actually known. But what about when you're basing negative attributes of people you might have encountered? Are you that person at the party, you know, that people don't want to invite? They say, don't be friends with the writer. How do you sort of, you know, draw on characters in terms of being based on people that might be recognisable? And how do you sort of reconcile that in your relationships and protect that side of it?
That's easy because I've never actually used a person that I know for a bad kind of character.
That's a good move,
I can think like Heidi was based on, as I said, someone I knew, but not at all like same circumstances or anything. So it was sort of more, I suppose, not based, inspired, you know. And there's one other character I have taken from someone I kind of knew, that's Wacky Wanda in the Patterson Girls, but I didn't know this person at all well. They don't know me. It was just someone I'd heard of sort of, you know, through. I feel like there's another one more recently. Oh, that's right. In this book, there's a character at the end, or she's referred to in the middle, called Wendy. We don't actually meet this character. Wendy Mann, who runs Geraldton Aviation company or services, can't remember. And she's mentioned in the middle of the book, and then in the end, spoiler, she's mentioned there too. Actually, I won't say why she's mentioned because I just realised that's kind of a spoiler. And she is actually a real person who I have flown on a tiny plane with up in Geraldton. And I actually asked her, would she mind if I actually put her in the book, because I thought it'd be a bit of fun. She was fine about that. But I think Graham Simpson said this at a romance writers conference many, many years ago about character, that his characters, and I think this is definitely true of me and most writers I know, it's not that you think this way on purpose, but he said characters are a third yourself, a third people you know, and a third your imagination. And I think that that's very organic. Like, I don't specifically go, okay, what things from myself am I going to put into this book? But you know, you're writing it, so your emotions, your heart, your experiences, your, you know, values, your everything's going to obviously influence your book. And then same with, you know, close friends and family, you know, even if you don't necessarily notice, and then the rest of it you kind of make up. So it's like an amalgamation, I suppose, of lots of people you've met. So I've never been in trouble, and journalists will often ask, you know, do people not want to be in books? But I actually find it's the opposite. You know, when we owned a supermarket in Gemelling, I'd have lots of people coming, when are you going to put me in a book? When are you going to put me in a book? I'd make a great character. And so, yeah, most people would love to be a character in a book.
And then you have the other awkward situation where you have to say, oh, you're not interesting enough. But that's another complexity.
You have to say that tactfully. You've got to just say.
Now, I've just got one more question before we go to audience questions, because, you know, I see these books as, you know, incredibly Australian in the landscape, in the setting, in the characters, in the scenarios that happen. But I've heard that the complete Bunyip Bay series is being released in the US next year. And I found that interesting because I'm wondering, have there been any tweaks? Are we giving the US the 100%, you know, Aussie version, or is it slightly different?
I think we are. I did ask about that and haven't heard anything back. So I think they may change the spelling. I don't know, of the things, you know. It's interesting because in this book, my friend, a close friend, said, I love this. There's one, he spelt mum wrong the whole way, you know, half the time, because Liam is American. So in his point of view, it's M-O-M. And she hadn't noticed that it was right in the other. She only noticed the right. In Henri's point of view, it's M-U-M, because that's, you know. But also my very first book, Jilted, came out in the US, you know, quite a few years ago. And they did want me to change a number of words in the book because for some reason the American, actually I think it's just the gatekeepers, because I know plenty of Americans who are much smarter than this, and they read, you know, like we do. And, you know, you read a whole sentence and you can, if you might not understand one word, but you can usually work out the context, work out what it means because of the context. But they wanted me to change a whole load of things. And I started going through the list and trying to change things. And then it was easy to change ute and trash, or rubbish and, taxi to cat, whatever, those sort of things. Boot to trunk and those sort of, but then I got to the word larrikin in my book, and I was trying to think of a word in America that meant larrikin, and I think we came up with class clown, and I can't remember, but it wasn't what I meant. And there was a couple of others like that too. And so I said, you know what, could we put a glossary in the back of the book instead? And so they did that in Jilted. I actually should contact my publisher about this and ask if we want to put a glossary in, because I think that went really well. So no, we'll see how it goes. I mean, my books have been available digitally in some places, not all of them, and it's just a matter of finding the right readers. I mean, I think the self-published world has showed us that we in Australia, we like to read characters and settings from all over the world, and the US and the UK, they like to read other settings too. But for years and years, the publishers been the gatekeepers kind of, and sort of have said basically, our readers don't want to read Australian settings or characters. I think we've seen that's not true with people like Leanne Moriarty and Jane Harper and quite a few other ones, so there's doors being opened, but it's a matter of getting, you never know how it's going to go. It's a matter of getting in front of the right people, and there's so many books out there. So for me, Australia is my main place.
I'm sure that's a great thing for you, and definitely your book sales just with the population. So good luck with that. Now, Katie, are there questions that we can come to for the minutes?
Aside from my own questions, and Claire, I'm so glad you asked about Rachel's favourite character, because I was fascinated to hear that as well. So we have a question from Anna. Rachael, I'd love to know your tips for getting emotions on the page. I tend to underwrite it or downplay it, and often cringe at my own writing when I try to put more emotion on the page. I think that means that you're a writer, Anna, if you're cringing at your own stuff.
Yeah, I agree.
She'd like to know if you've got any advice for her about getting emotion on the page without having to never read it again and throw it in the bin.
I find this really interesting because I do think it changes from genre to genre, because when I was writing for years and years trying to get published with Mills and Boon, and it's very much about the emotion between the characters, so much less than the plot, and it's a lot about how people are viscerally, physically feeling in a situation, and those things are hard because I'm always like, oh, her heart's thumping, it's pulse is racing, and she's there's only so many kind of things. I'm sure, Anna, that you have got this book, The Emotion Thesaurus, which I do think is fabulous. I love all these books in terms of it tells you, for anyone else who doesn't know, so it says disbelief, and then it tells you kind of the physical signs. So if you're looking at if you're in a point of view but you're looking at someone else, it'll tell you, they might, if they're not believing, they might be a loss for words or shake their head. But at the same time, it feels like now I've had this book for so long that this stuff feels to me like it's almost cliched, and it's so hard to find sort of fresh stuff. I'm an overwriter. You said you underwrite or downplay it. So I probably put more in than I should, and a lot in the last couple of edits I've been sort of, for anyone who's not in the writing world and is here more as a reader, we often get told to show, don't tell. So, instead of saying he was angry, kind of say his face is burned and you could see the, I'm just doing a really bad example, but like show it rather than tell it. Sorry. And I find those sometimes, that's what I say about genre, when I'm reading a romance story, there's a lot more of that kind of stuff. And yet I often get told to take that out by my editor in the women's fiction. And she's the same editor in Real Romance for the last few books too. So I've been more aware. And I think underwriting is not necessarily a bad thing, because I feel like, to me, this is probably the wrong, I feel like we've got too much emotion sometimes in book, because if you've grown up in the romance writing world, which I know you have, you've kind of like been so much forced to put on it. But if you start looking at general fiction, it's not necessarily, like, I feel like you can just do a little bit here and there and that's enough, rather than really ramming it over the reader's head, if that makes sense. But there's another thing I was going to say. cringing at I always cringe at the ending, especially in the rural romances, because I'm thinking this sex scenes and things like that. I'm thinking, oh my gosh, this is either so corny and, or at the end it's too naff and it's too over the top sweet. But what I think of that is often not what the reader thinks. So, I think you're probably on the right track. I'm sorry, that's probably not very helpful, because I think that's one of the things I struggle with too. But the other thing would be definitely just to, like, a book that you've really, really loved and you think was amazing, not necessarily that you've seen the emotion in that, but, you couldn't stop reading it and you loved the characterization and everything. I would really go back, something I keep meaning to do, and look at how that author's done it. Like, you can't learn, like, you can learn more, I think, from reading an actual book that you really enjoyed and just found amazing, and you wish, those books where you go, why am I even trying? I think reread them and work, and with a highlighter, and work out what they're doing, because I think you can learn a lot from other books rather than all the craft stuff that's out there. It's got to be sort of you got to really feel it yourself, I think. Yeah.
Beautiful. Yeah.
Oh, sorry, go on.
I was just going to say, Anna said thank you and that she'll worry less now about getting enough emotion on the page. Claire, what were you going to say?
I was just going to say, have you got any more questions?
Oh, yeah, we've got from Julie. So do you restrict your stories to a certain number of words? It sounds like you sort of have to when in the edit. And do you keep to a writing schedule? So having written so many books, obviously having a family, moderating Facebook groups, you do a lot of things. How do you commit to sitting down to write the book?
I was going to say, I don't do a lot of things too. So I don't do much gardening. I don't do any ironing. As I said, I don't do huge amounts of TV. So, no means a superwoman. So I'll answer the first part about do you restrict your stories to number of words. I have a specific word count on my contracts now, which I actually thought, so I've got rural romance contract and I've got women's fiction contracts. I thought the rural was only 100,000 and the women's fiction 130,000. Turns out somehow in the last, but they're both 130,000. Because I think I have written a number of long books, that's come to all editors have come to expect that from me, and readers have come to expect it kind of too. So this one, I think it's only just over 100,000 in the end, but it was a lot under when I first wrote it, because the reason being that you mentioned the US, and to me, Australia is my main focus. The readers in Australia have been the ones that have made me able to do this as a full-time job and been really supportive. And, I've got a great community of readers that I know and love in Australia. And most of them prefer the books that are set in Australia, I've worked out. Saying that, I've written one that was set mostly overseas. And so to me, anything outside of Australia is the icing on the cake. But if I can keep building, and it's not my focus, but if I can keep building here, that's my goal. Saying that, that's been one of my issues getting into the US, is my books are too long. So I got really close with the number of my women's fiction books. And that's why I mentioned overriding earlier. And I've until this book I'm currently writing, I've managed to cut them back a bit. I've learned a lot in my editing process with my current editor, which is Di Blacklock, who used to be a writer herself, that I do overwrite things. And often I will, what I meant to say before, often I will show and tell, where, whether you need telling or showing, you don't usually need both at the same time. So I've learned, to cut back. But yeah, one of the reasons for not getting into the US often is my books are too long. Their sweet spot is kind of between really around 80,000 words, 90 at the max. And, you'll see exceptions, of course, but they're usually exceptions, big names. So, Leanne Moriarty's latest book was 145,000 words, I think. But, she can do what she wants now. And, same with Marianne Keyes and people like, but the majority of, debut books or, building your author are in that sort of 80,000 to 100,000 on the smaller side spot. So mine being, well over that, it's kind of a difficult thing. So I have been trying to write a little tighter, but then I managed that with this one, and the publisher was like, no, it's too short. So I can't win. And in terms of the schedule, yes, I work full-time, well, I don't know, like loosely full-time, because I'll say I'm often, like, as you said, I'm moderating Facebook groups. So I'm often, I'll reply to emails at night. We do on Sundays, I'm doing stuff and things like that. So it's not your 9 to 5 full-time job, but I probably do work the hours of a full-time job. But my writing, I've very much realized, and I think this is very individual, and, you know, everyone has to work out what works for them. For me, I'm a morning writer, and I'm not early, but get the kids to school. And then, so I'm usually back at my desk because they're all high school now, and I've dropped them off at trains and buses by like 8 o'clock. I faff around for like half an hour, and I'm really trying to write between like 8:30 and 12:30, because after lunch sort of time, I'm just not as good. So if I need to get my, I just get easily distracted. I'm tired. I can't, you know, so I'm trying to really focus. I think it's a big, huge thing with schedule is working out what times work for you. And then really protecting, like I don't do appointments. I mean, this is in the morning for me, but it's during sort of promo time. But generally, like I don't do appointments in the morning if possible. You know, I won't do calls, off my phone on silent and all that kind of stuff. And I write solidly in those times. And then afternoon, I'll, you know, get other admin type stuff, jobs, respond to emails, do Facebook and that kind of stuff. So yes, I do keep to quite a firm schedule. It's got to be flexible because I have kids and books come out and, you know, all other things, but I do try, and that schedule I aim for 1,500 to 2,000 words a day, saying that I won't always get there, and I don't beat myself up about it now, because some days like thinking time is just as important, or sometimes you just have to slow down and, you know, I have to fix a scene that I know. It really just depends how you write. And so I'm learning this year to be a lot kinder to myself. I don't think there's any point in writing 2,000 words if you really have no idea. And it's a balance. Someone said recently I should call if I was ever going to write a writing craft book, it depends, because whenever I answer a question, I say, well, it kind of depends on this or this. And it's the same with that sort of goal for writing per day. Sometimes I do have to kind of just push on and write. And even though I'm not, and if I start writing, something will happen. But then other times that's not going to work. And I just have to take a step back, reread some stuff, go away, have a think, walk, whatever. So it's a matter of really, I think, learning yourself and your process and trusting that. And also, yeah, being kind to yourself, but not too kind that you give yourself every day off.
That's great.
Oh, sorry. I was going to say we've probably only got time for one or two more questions. Katie, have you got some?
I'm going to go with Wayne, and I wonder, it's from Wayne Johns, and I'm wondering.
No relation.
I was going to say, because
I can easily answer that quickly if you want, because then I can do the last one. So I would love to do some interstate signings. It all depends on Mark McGowan, whether he'll let us out and back into the state, because that's a problem, because I'm pretty much a single mum. My husband lives 12 hours away, so I can't, you know, just go away and not come back. I can go away and get people to look after my children, but there has to be an end date. And so, yeah, is there time to answer Anna's question?
Yeah.
Sorry, another question for me. We have, over the course of writing 5 books in a series, what have you learned about writing series? Good question. Because some people say to me, will you write another one in this book series? And it's been so popular, I could never have imagined. And, you know, people and I did seed in a few possible characters, just very tiny references, because of the possibility. But saying that, yes, I have learned, I would never, as I said, I'm not a very good planner, so I don't know if I could do this, but I would try and plan out at least, you know, the 5. If I was going to write a series, and again, I would think about my 5 like books that maybe I would write in that series, and I would work out when I started who the main characters were going to be in each. I kind of did that loosely with the first 3, but it did change for various reasons. So again, you need to be flexible. I think that, you know, you might have a brain, you know, light bulb moment and things kind of change. I would definitely keep, as I said, that document that lists all the characters, not just the main ones, but the people I've mentioned, and things like if they're a vegetarian, because I've stumbled across stuff like that before in another book where I've said someone was a vegetarian and then had them eating bacon. Luckily my editor picked that up. But, you know, so I definitely would be more organized. That's probably the main thing, I think. Yeah.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. Go ahead, Claire. Sorry.
Is there another question you wanted to squeeze in?
No, I think we're all good now, Claire.
I was just going to ask you, Rachel, to finish up, because, you know, we are talking to people who've come in through a library event. We've identified some as writers themselves, I'm sure all are passionate readers. Hit us with a couple of recommendations, because people love hearing from authors about books that they're recommending that they can maybe. I'll put you on the spot, haven't I?
No, that's okay. I know what I was saying. I like to be able to show, but the best book, my favourite books that I've read this year are The Paper Palace by, I think it's Miranda Cowley Heller. It's a debut novel and it's just brilliant. It's a sort of two timelines. One's 50 years and the other's 24 hours. And it's about the heart of it. It's a moral dilemma, a woman who has to choose between her first love and the guy she always kind of loved, but her husband of 30 years, who is a wonderful guy and she loves him kind of as well. And there's a lot of dark secrets and things in there as well, from her childhood to, to now. It's really, really well written. I listened to an audio, but then I bought the hardback because I wanted to have it in my collection. Another really fun one I love, which is not as easy to get in Australia, but I'm sure the libraries will be able to hunt it down, is The Lost Husband of Frick Island by Colleen Oakley. And it's just such a cool, quirky premise. I do love stuff like that, and I wish I could come up with it. So basically, this lady lives on a tiny island that's sinking in, I can't remember which coast of America. There's a bit of climate change issues there, but also the main part of it is that her husband, who was a fisherman, died just at the beginning of the book or before it starts, yet she hasn't kind of accepted that he died. So she's gone about her life. She's only young, like 25 or something. She goes about her life pretending that as if he's still alive, walking into work, cooking his dinner. She goes out to dinner at the local pub, and the amazing thing is the whole town is going along with it, to sort of help her through this. So they bring his dinner, they talk to him, hey, how you going? And so then this journalist happens to stumble upon the island come across for a small story, and he doesn't really want to be there, like a bake-off or something. And then he stumbles across this crazy story where a whole island is pretending the guy is still alive to go along with this poor woman. So it's a really good story. Yeah.
Well, you've intrigued me, so I'm going to look that one up. But really, of course, we are primarily talking about your own book.
Thank you.
That way. Rachael Johns, Outback Secrets. I'm sure it's available at the library and definitely available at your favourite bookstore. It's great that Frankston City Library has run this event to support authors and bring authors and readers together. So thank you, Frankston City Library. Thanks to everyone who's joined us today. Thank you so much, Rachael Johns, for all your stories. Did you want to have a final goodbye?
Yes, I just want to say, echo your thoughts to everyone, the Franklin Library and everyone who's come along, and the great questions. And thanks, Claire, for your fabulous interview skills and your questions too. I really appreciate you taking your time out of your day.
Thank you.
Katie, do you want to say anything?
Thank you, Claire. Thank you, Rachael. I'll just let you know, guys, that we have Rachael's physical book in the library for you to reserve right now. And we also have it on e-audiobook on BorrowBox, as well as on ebook format, also on BorrowBox. So there's no excuse. It's available for you. And also just check out Rachael's website as well. And hopefully there's links on there that will let you have a look at the Facebook groups and things that you have, which if anyone's looking for book recommendations, that is the place to go. You'll get lots and lots.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rachael. Thank you, Claire. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today. And have a great afternoon, and we'll see you soon.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.